to FTC Feature, the podcast, where we talk about anything and everything FTC in the North Texas region. Thank you for joining us today on our holiday special. I'm your host, Louisa, and I'm also joined by our co-host, Aayush. Today's episode is going to be extra special, and that's because we have not one, not two, but three different segments, all with different guests. This episode will be much more dense and long than our typical podcasts. Let's start off with some FTC news, shall we? First off is a Christmas scrimmage, also known as the Christmas Cup, from December 26th to January 1st, hosted by FTC Team 17294 Overdrive. There will also be a coding workshop hosted by Team 11472 Ravenclaw Robotics on January 2nd. There will also be, on January 3rd, EP League Meet 3 and the Remote League Meet 4. On January 10th, there will be our first spring qualifier and the EP and Remote League tournament. Let's move on to our feature stories. Aayush, would you like to share your story?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about some calls that obviously as a team, we've been doing a lot of cold calling these companies. And one of the companies that we cold called was Dunkin' Donuts. And I don't mean to throw them under the bus, but I'll just say that their customer support could have been a little bit better because they were low-key raging at us for a lot of the time. And that they always said, oh yeah, we'll get back to you on a different day. And then we call them on that day and they say, oh, we'll get back to you tomorrow. And then that goes on for like 10 billion years, and it's kind of annoying. So we kind of just ditched Dunkin' Donuts. The team was extremely mad about that. I know particularly one of our outreach lead, Katie, was very not happy about those calls. And but we're still doing well. It's been a long time, so we've recovered mentally from that.
Aayush, would you also like to introduce how the giveaways are going to work throughout this episode?
Yes, so obviously this is the holiday special, and in the spirit of Christmas and the associated holidays, we are going to be having a giveaway. So we're going to be giving back to the FIRST and STEM community. We're going to be hosting multiple giveaways which are going to be scattered throughout this video. So there's going to be 3 giveaways. There's going to be an Andy Mark $50 gift card, a Rev $50 gift card, and finally a GoBuilda $50 gift card. So right now we're going to do the $50 Andy Mark gift card giveaway. So all you have to do is go to our YouTube channel, so subscribe and like the video and comment your team name and which giveaway you'd like to be winning by just saying, I want to win this. We will be picking a random lucky winner next week, and we'll be letting you all know in that podcast who wins so that you can claim your prize.
Awesome. The first segment that we're going to feature through this holiday special will be about FIRST managers and talking about how managing events work at FIRST. Our special guest today, as you may have noticed, is Mr. Cherryholmes, also the PDP of North Texas. Mr. Cherryholmes, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, guys. I really enjoyed being on the podcast about the EP League. So I look forward to also adding some more information to this podcast.
Would you like to start off with how FIRST events are managed throughout North Texas? For example, who may organize events, how does hosting events work, etc.?
Well, in general, I've had a lot of people contact me, and I contact certain people in our region, and they ask if they can host an event at their school or their mosque or their church or their organization, wherever it may be. And we start the discussion. Normally what happens then after that is I meet with the person in person and I go to their facility to see if it's even doable, or we figure out how many teams we can hold at such a facility. And we set a date, and we set 8 or 9 dates throughout the year for different qualifiers and different meets and different tournaments. And so once the venue has been determined and the host agrees to it, we start planning how to get the stuff there. And sometimes the host has their own field, their own game elements. Sometimes I have to bring the game elements, or I have to ask a certain team to bring their game elements. And then there's a system called the VMS, the Volunteer Management System. So I, the event manager, also Patrick and Emily, they have access to the system, and we're vetting volunteers. So a one field event, for instance, we need 5 referees, including the head referee. We would need 2 field resetters. We would need 4 cuers, and we would also need, traffic control, other things like that. A 2-field event, we need 9 referees. We need also 4 cuers, 4 field resetters. All of these jobs have to be done by someone. So we're figuring out who's going to do what job. Moreover,
so how do you figure that out?
Well, the majority of the time, the younger you are, the job is less responsible. So field resetting normally goes to just school members of the school. Queuing also goes to school members. So normally every event really has a team that's hosting it. So that those team members are doing those very important jobs. So who decides that? Basically, the event director and I decide, who does what job. Referees and judges, where we are looking for adults to do those particular positions. Also, as part of the lead up to the event, we have to decide if the event's going to be 100% remote, like the Lamar High School qualifier was on December 11th. And we did that event on Thursday night and Friday night on Zoom. All the judging decisions were made on Zoom, and all the teams at that event got interviewed on Thursday night, and some of them were called back for a Friday night interview. And that's what worked for that particular qualifier host. Whereas Marcus High School, their volunteer pool prefers to have traditional events where the judges are on site. So the event host and I decide together, and through our committee, what type of judging they're going to do. Now, next semester, we're going to try another modeling of judging where the teams do their initial interview on Zoom with the judges. And then on Saturday, the judges are going to show up to the event and make the final decision after seeing a couple of matches played. So stay tuned for that type of model. We haven't decided yet what type of judging we're going to do for the Super Qualifier or the Regional Championship. But hopefully, as the season moves on, we're going to get more and more traditional.
Okay, cool. And I guess this kind of ties in about volunteers. When we were talking with Patrick last week on the podcast, he did mention that there was some lack of volunteers at some of these. So how do you get more volunteers?
Well, the problem is that during the Ultimate Goal season, there was no need for referees. The overwhelming majority of events were remote. We only had 2 or 3 events that were not remote, that actually took places at schools. So after Ultimate Goal, our major pool of referees pretty much disappeared. And also I myself was a referee, and I can't really do that position anymore because I am in a new position. And so we're struggling to get referees, and different places deal with it differently. Every event is a new venue and therefore a different problem. So at the Dealey event, the first qualifier, we trained referees literally on the spot. And they were coaches who knew the game. They knew what was going on. So it wasn't very difficult to train them within like 1 hour in the morning. But when we went to the EP League, a lot of the volunteers did not have as much familiarity with the game, although they had an amazing heart and they had an amazing passion for the event. They didn't know much about the game, so it was really difficult to train them as referees the day of the event. So a lot of these volunteers, when they sign up, they actually have to take a course online. And so as the season has progressed throughout the last semester, we've been making sure that all volunteers who volunteer at the events take that online course and also come early to the event so that we can train them appropriately. Judges are not that bad because, anybody who is a professional can be a judge. Judges are there to judge portfolios, control awards, judge outreach, and judge robot designs. So when we get judges who have business backgrounds or even medical backgrounds or documentation backgrounds, it doesn't matter. We can train them within 30 minutes about how to judge certain teams, just tell them the specific names for the awards. The thing is that we always need judges. There's a recommended number of judges for the amount of teams there are at the event.
Has that volunteer situation gotten, I guess, any better since more and more time has progressed?
Well, thankfully, some of the referees before Ultimate Goal started showing up again, and their presence has really helped. But every weekend is a new weekend, and I'm always working on trying to get every position staffed. And I wouldn't say it's better, but we are meeting the quotas every week. And now it's going to get a little bit harder because in the spring semester, we're going to have 2 events per weekend for a lot of the events that are going on.
Right. Yeah, I can see why that could pose a problem. But I hope that situation gets better. I know that as to the viewers, the best thing that you can do is reach out to communities in your area, see if they can just get some volunteers to learn about refereeing, and maybe they could come to one of these events and serve a huge help. And that would certainly help out the situation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Each event director has to find the individuals that are willing to go the extra mile to do all the training, to do all the readings. And of course, we do have these dedicated volunteers that just go every weekend. That's how I used to be. I used to go to every event as a referee or a judge, mainly a referee. And these repetitious volunteers are what make our region thrive.
Right. And if we could get more of those, that would definitely help our region. So absolutely.
Maybe like between hybrid and traditional qualifiers, which one would you say that you prefer because of the volunteer shortage situation?
They are both equally stressful as a program delivery partner. So with a remote event, these judges are giving up their Thursday night, maybe even their Friday night. I always feel bad when all the discussions last until like 6:30, sometimes 10 o'clock at night. The traditional event has been a little bit more comfortable because they show up to the event early in the morning. They make all the decisions on site. However, they lost their entire Saturday. So from my perspective, I'm like, I don't know how to sell it to these people. Like, you're going to give up your entire Saturday, but it will be all done quickly. Or you're going to give up 2 evenings, Thursday night and Friday night, but they both be half nights. So they both had their pros and cons this season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair answer because obviously it both, I guess, adds up to the same thing where you're missing a whole day, but it's just how you're missing it. So I guess that's different for each person and what they prefer.
It's also stressful to appease the teams. I tried my best to design schedules that would do very well for all schools. So my general rule is that every organization or school does not have a judging at the same exact time. Middle schools go first, high schools go next, and then community teams go last. And I figured that would work across the board because in general, middle schools release earlier than high schools. High schools release later. And then community teams meet at a house anyways, and they have to, it takes time for them to get there. So designing the remote schedule is very difficult. On a traditional event, it's just as equally difficult because then you have teams traveling from we have a team traveling from 2 hours away, and we have a team that's traveling from next door. So I have to kind of figure out by the zip codes which teams I should put at 8 o'clock a.m. and which teams I should put at 10 o'clock a.m. for the judging. Moreover, at a traditional event, while they're going through judging, we're trying to get the robots inspected, and that's very stressful. And we want to start the matches at around 11 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes the teams, because of judging or because of their lack of preparedness for the event, they lengthen the inspection and the judging times in the morning to be more than what we can handle. And we don't want people leaving at 7 o'clock at night. So,
Right.
as I said before, every event is its own ball game. Every event, we have different considerations, try to appease the teams, appease the volunteers, appease the kids, so that everyone has a fun experience.
Right. And I think to avoid this inspection problem, it's very important that all teams come very prepared and they come here ready to compete at the qualifier instead of having the robot not pass through inspection. So I think that the teams can do a lot better, and that will also help management, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I just want to make sure it's clear. I'm not complaining with this podcast. I just, as PDP, my role at every event is the chicken with his head cut off. And literally, one moment I might be inspecting a robot. The next moment I might be scoring a game. The next moment I might be walking into the judge's room to discuss a certain team. So whenever you see me at an event, I don't have a specific role. My role is to run around and make sure everything is going okay. That's also difficult because I was a key volunteer in the last 3 years. So I can't be counted on to be a referee anymore. I cannot be counted on to be a judge anymore. I cannot be counted on to be an inspector of a robot. My job now is the delivery partner. So it's just to ensure the quality of the event. And at the end of the event, the last 30 minutes of the event, I'm sitting down at my corner. I'm doing calculations of advancements, trying to figure out who might not be going to the super qualifier or to the regional event, trying to figure out teams that had already played at previous events, if they had already advanced. So I'm like at the very end of the day when the award ceremony is going on, I'm doing a lot of hard calculations and spreadsheet analysis to figure out who I am going to advance and who I'm not going to advance to the next level.
Right. And I guess that being a PDP is extremely stressful for you, isn't it?
Well, so yeah, it is. I mean, once again, the good news is for me is that I'm the only paid person to do these first events. I get paid by First in Texas hourly. So that's the side benefit is I get a paycheck in the mail to do all of this. On the other hand, yeah, it is stressful. I'm a full-time teacher. I teach every day for 8 hours. I have a physics class. I have a 6th grade science class. I have an advanced robotics class. I run 3 teams at my school. And so at 6 o'clock at night, that's when I start doing the work for PDP. And so, yeah, it is stressful, but it's nice because in the past I was volunteering all my time to do all the help that I did. And now I'm actually getting some financial benefit for being in this position. And I think that the other people who were interviewing for this job would not have been able to keep up the quality that we've had for the last 4 or 5 years. I really got to know Patrick over the last couple of years, really got to know Emily, really got to know Stacy, who is our judge advisor. And, me knowing them personally and most of the people who are running events in our region made me the most eligible person to take on this job, even though I have no resources that the previous PDPs had. Patrick worked at UTD. He could hire 2 or 3 students and actually pay them a minimum salary wage to do certain tasks. But I'm just a guy who's trying to run all these events out of his own apartment. And so it made it a little difficult, but I love every minute of it. And I love doing these podcasts with you guys, for instance. And I love going to every event and seeing all the happiness and saying, hey, I had something to do with the fact that all these teams came here today.
And we're very grateful for everything that you've done for North Texas in general, whether it be, going around, as you say, like a chicken with its head cut off during qualifiers or managing everything. Countless amounts of people have said you've done an amazing job. And I'm going to join in and say that you've done a really nice job. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. We'll see what you have to say in early February. So it's going to be a more difficult January is going to be the difficult one because I'm going to have 2 events per weekend.
Right.
So, and then we have 167 teams in North Texas, by the way. Yeah. And that is 47 more teams than I was expecting to have. So all my plans were geared toward 120 teams. So now I have to cater to 14 dozen teams to make sure everyone's happy. And there's always going to be complaints. If teams did not compete during the fall, it means they're only going to get 1 qualifier during the spring because of the amount of qualifiers that we'll have in the spring and the amount of teams we have in the region. And that's the reason why we're going to be moving toward league models next year, because I feel like just having 1 weekend where you get to prove everything is not enough. I think teams should have multiple opportunities to prove themselves and to prove their robot. So after all is said and done here in Texas, as far as qualifiers go, we will be planning out next year intensively until the season begins in September.
Right. And when we do shift to more of a league-based competitions, won't we require a lot more volunteers, refs, and whatnot?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's, again, another reason why, to the viewer, you need to get more involved in your community and get people to volunteer at these events, because it's imperative that if we want to shift to a league-based competition style, that we're going to need people to administer these.
Now, I don't know if I fully answered how we manage these events.
I think you answered most of what we wanted to talk about, right? There's one thing. Is there like how big is the committee that manages all the event stuff?
The committee that I started this year didn't exist before I became PDP. Basically, every event director and their partners and the key volunteers are invited. So we'll have a Zoom meeting. We're going to have one again in early January. We had our latest one right before Thanksgiving. Our Zoom meeting consists of anywhere from 20 to 30 people.
Okay. And
this did not exist before because a lot of the committee they didn't have regular committee meetings. So this is kind of something that I've introduced this year, and it's very beneficial. So we can all talk to each other about what went well, what went wrong at certain events, who's going to go where. Like especially next, when I do my next committee meeting, we'll be talking about like which volunteers are going to go to this event while the other event's happening concurrently. That way we ensure that both events are going well, because I myself cannot be in 2 places at one time. I will probably be visiting, multiple venues on the same day, but then I can't be that chicken with his head cut off anymore.
So thank you for joining us today on this holiday special. We really appreciate everything you've brought to the table, and we hope to see you again soon. As always, we're honored to have you on. So take care, sir.
Thank you.
Starting on to our second segment, we will be talking about judging, and we have Lloyd here with us.
Hey, yes, my name is Lloyd Kwan. I'm currently the R League coordinator for this season, where the R League is comprised of the remote teams that we have in the North Texas region. I also will be serving as the judge advisor for the remote league, and as well as I'm a volunteer that helps out throughout the North Texas region for First Tech Challenge. Usually you see me floating as a judge throughout the region.
We're very honored to have you on. So I think the first thing we want to ask about is just a little bit of background about yourself. So how did you get into First?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a part of First honestly for quite a few years now. I started on a FLL team. I grew up in the greater Los Angeles region, and so I moved up to Dallas for college. And so I started my humble beginnings on a First Lego League team back in my middle school. And then once FLL had ended for me, I joined an FTC team and as well as an FRC team. In my later years, especially my senior year, I was the business lead on my first tech challenge team, and I was also a team captain on my FRC team. So a lot of my experience, I've been within first for a little bit now, and ever since, I've always just been floating around as a volunteer throughout various first programs, as I'm very still passionate about helping the next generation of kids be able to participate in first, as many people have done while I was in the program. Many people have dedicated their time to make my participation in first possible. So I definitely have been just ever since wanting to give back.
Why did you start the remote league?
So the remote league was started because the remote league is actually being sponsored by the UT Dallas First Alumni Association, one of the many student organizations at UT Dallas. And so we wanted to get involved in some capacity this year. And with many of the COVID restrictions still currently in place at UT Dallas, we knew that hosting an event in person would be a challenge. And when Lon had reached out to me with the possibility of creating a remote league to help accommodate for teams within the region that might still have issues or might have concerns still competing within an in-person league, we opened up this opportunity to allow for greater participation regardless of your location and your limitations that you may have, so that we can continue to have teams that may be a little bit more cost conscious or COVID conscious still be involved in First Tech Challenge this season.
Right, and I think reaching a broader audience extremely important. So we're all very grateful for starting the remote league. So thanks for that.
Yeah, indeed.
So let's go back to the whole judging thing. What do you teach judges to be looking for?
I think the one important thing to keep in mind when it comes to judging sessions is in the beginning, when all the teams do their morning interviews, first impressions do really count. As you can think of it as kind of like Shark Tank. You're making your first pitch to the judges, and you're essentially trying to you're introducing yourselves to the judges for the very first time, and you want to put out your best impression. So having there's many interpretations of what being professional or have what that may look like essentially in the judging room. But essentially, what we look for as judges is we want to be able to hear a well-rounded presentation in the morning session, because essentially we want to be able to get an initial feel of what is your team about. And so being able to cover the many aspects of the First Tech Challenge, from robot design to CAD to programming to your outreach to anything relating to business. We want to hear all about that in a compact summary, in a sense, so that it gives the judges a good overall sense of what is your team doing exactly. Because this really plays really importantly after all the judging the morning sessions are over, because that's when all the judges begin to congregate into our main room after all the sessions are over, and we start deciding which teams that we feel were strong in certain areas of robot or even business or outreach. And so making that first impression and having a well-rounded presentation during your morning session is really the key to really getting your judges' attention.
Right. And then after the morning one, what do you look for?
So once we finished up the morning sessions and we all congregate back into the room, that's where we start making kind of our initial picks of like teams that impressed us in certain categories. So we really, in the morning, try to figure out, within our room, fell into which award category. And, teams can fall into multiple award categories. And so we really try to make an initial list of like top 5 or top 10, depending on how big the event size is, of teams that we want to go to interview in the afternoon. In the afternoon session, what we really look for is we begin to narrow down based on what we saw in the morning session, essentially. And that's where you probably noticed as teams, you received a lot more pointed and direct questions during the afternoon session. And it's because we want to know, more about the details about what you're doing. So if we nominate, if we put you on essentially the short list for the Motivate Award, you can definitely expect, a lot more questions that are tailored around, your community outreach and how has that impacted the community. And so that's where we basically, the afternoon sessions serve as a good way for us to learn more and dig a little bit deeper into your guys's outreach, or maybe a different maybe a part of your robot when it comes to a mechanism or whatnot. So that's how kind of the afternoon session looks like.
What would you say a judge looks for in a team's ENP?
Let's see. So when it comes to the engineering portfolio, which is different than the engineering notebook, there's definitely some guidelines that FIRST has put out there, but you want to make the experience for the judge essentially as seamless as possible. So organizing your notebook in a way where it has a logical flow, or things are clearly labeled. I'm a big fan of using headers or using big text to label certain sections off, like this is outreach. Make it very clear, like this is all about outreach on these pages, and and then maybe a couple pages later it's all about the robot. I think it's I've seen notebooks I've seen engineering portfolios in the past where things are just kind of scattered throughout the engineering portfolio, and there's not really any flow, and you kind of get confused looking at it. So definitely having a good good organization and good where you're basically putting stuff is definitely something that makes the judges' life a lot easier, because as judges we try to write as much notes down as possible whenever we're interviewing you guys, but we try writing as quickly as possible as your mouth speaks, but sometimes we miss those couple words. And so having things really organized in your engineering portfolio sometimes allows us to refer back to it when we're talking amongst our other judges. Like if during your morning session you mentioned that you had you did some outreach with kids at the library, and and we don't really remember the details, we can hopefully flip back to your engineering portfolio and be like, oh, this is what they did, and there's details about it. So it's kind of more of a reference manual in a sense of things that you brought up during the morning session that can help aid us throughout the day if we ever need to refer back to something.
Let's wrap it up here then. Thank you, Lloyd, for appearing on our holiday special.
We're honored to have you on the podcast as always.
Of course. You guys have a good holiday season.
Before we get started on the third segment, we are going to have our second giveaway. This time we will be giving out a Rev $50 gift card. And as always, remember that all you have to do is go onto our YouTube channel at FTC Feature, subscribe, like this video, and comment your team name and number in which giveaway you are entering by saying the prize of the giveaway. For our third segment, we have two guests with us, two referees of North Texas, and that is Emily and Patrick.
So hi everybody, my name is Patrick. Many of you know me as the coach of FTC 7172. Some of you know me as being the former PDP for North Texas, but this season I'm the chief referee for the North Texas region.
Hi, I'm Emily. I used to be the chief referee for the North Texas region, and now I am no longer. Patrick has taken over that role this year, but I have been a referee since Velocity Vortex. So this is my 6th season reffing and my 9th season in FTC.
So Patrick, we interviewed you in the last episode of the podcast, and we're encouraging people to go watch that if you need more of an introduction to who he is and his involvement with First. But Emily, why don't you explain how you got involved in First in the first place? No pun intended.
Of course. So I actually started on an FTC team in my junior year of high school, which was the block party season. So for those of you who are newer to FTC, that was the 2013-2014 season. And so I participated in FTC for 2 years. And then in the rescue season, I mentored my old team and I started refereeing in the Velocity Vortex season at the behest of Patrick. And now I am here. I worked for Patrick for a couple of years. So some of you may be familiar of me from the UTD years. And then I also just recently left Rev Robotics. I might have contacted and talked to many of you when I was at Rev. I was their customer success or customer support person.
Cool. You've been doing FTC for a long time. So I am a rookie to FTC myself. This is my first year. So it's really interesting to get more insight by talking to people who have done this for literally like half of my age. So it's very, very interesting to get more perspective on FTC and what it was like before I joined. I think we should start it off by addressing what's going on right now. We got a pandemic. So one of the first questions that I want to ask is, how has this pandemic affected reffing in the round?
Yeah, I can start tackling this and Patrick can add on to whatever he feels necessary. So the pandemic has actually affected refereeing a lot. So especially North Texas, and I think this is true for all regions, but I know that we felt it in North Texas and we've noticed it a lot in North Texas. Prior to the pandemic, we had a really good set of like 8 to 10 referees who were consistent referees, who were FTC alumni or had been doing FTC for years. And we lost a lot of them during the pandemic just because they've moved on to other things or they're just not as active in the region anymore. So we went from a referee staff of 8 to 10 referees that were consistent longtime referees to about 4. And other than that, our referee staff for this year is entirely brand new. So these are people who have never reffed before. A lot of the referees we've had so far this season are people who this is their first year even knowing that First exists, which has been a real big trial and tribulation for us because it's bringing all those people up to speed on what First is and then also teaching them how to ref, which is actually a complicated thing in and of itself because there's a lot of penalties and things like that you really have to learn how to interpret. And as someone who took years to learn, I can tell you that it takes a long time to really nail in a lot of those penalties and understand them fully.
Yeah, and I would add, another thing that the pandemic did as far as refereeing goes is that because so many of our events last year were remote events, that meant we didn't need referees. We only had 3 events where we needed referees. And each of those were one field events. So you only needed 4 or 5 referees for that. So it's now very different as we're going into January. We just didn't pick up any referees from last year. And as Emily said, we lost a lot. And a lot of people just even lost experience at what it meant to be a referee. So now just looking ahead a little bit as we're coming up into January. In January, there are going to be 7 or 8 events taking place in January, where there are multiple events on the same day, and they're all 2 field events. So each one of those needs to have 8 or 9 referees, and that's just going to be really a challenge for the region to one, identify who the people are, and then 2, get them all trained up so they understand the rules and know what to look for and are familiar with the game and all the rules and things like that.
How stressful is it being a referee for you? Is it one of those easier said than done situations?
Definitely. So, part of the reason that I personally stepped back from head referee this season is that I was doing 10 to 12 events as a head referee per season, which when you say it out loud, it sounds like not a lot of events, right? You're like 10 to 12, that's not that big of a deal. But when you're doing them every weekend on top of having a full-time job and you have to keep on top of what the rules are, it ended up being a huge stressor. And then the other thing is that being a referee is actually kind of polarizing in that, no matter what you do or how you make a call, you're going to upset someone, right? I've had competitions where, and at one point I was called too lenient, that I was being too lenient on rules, and then another point that I was being too strict. And so it's like you always have those opinions that are going on that can make it very difficult. And it's hard too, because we don't want to be mean to you as people in FTC, and we don't want to come across as mean. I had a conversation last week with the girls from Dorkside where they were telling me that their first memory of me was a time that I yelled at them across the field because they were touching their phones or something like that when they weren't supposed to. And I understand that that's scary, but for us, it's y'all are so in the zone that it's very hard to communicate with you across the field without yelling. And so it's you always feel bad doing that because it's we understand that you're not intending to, but it's hard for us to communicate without yelling at you guys across the field.
Yep. I would definitely agree. It's somewhat stressful being a referee. For me, it gets less stressful as the day goes on. The first few matches are the most stressful, and especially early in the season when you're trying to get your new referees up to speed so they know what to do. You'll have new teams. You'll have rookies who've never been on a field before, so they're having to figure out what to do. You're having to explain the rules in many cases to teams because they didn't either read the rules or they didn't quite understand the rules or they skipped a rule. So the first few matches are typically stressful, but once you get to about the middle of the qualification match schedule, then everybody's kind of in a rhythm and it's less stressful there, except when you get a really strange thing that happens on the field. And sometimes you just have to really be able to think fast on your feet, and it's stressful. And you'll be second guessing yourself after the competition is over going, did I make the right call there? What should I have done? Things like that. I think one of the biggest lessons that's in the first manuals for referees is they say, when the day's over, don't spend a lot of time rethinking what you did. They basically say, if you were there and you made the best calls you could and stuff, you did your job. And, that it's almost impossible for any referee to get everything perfect just because there's so many things going on. So it is stressful on one hand, but on the other hand, at the end of the day, you kind of have to, be forgiving to yourself and to the teams and stuff and just say, hey, we did the best we could with what we had at that particular day.
Right. And obviously, as you said, with the referees being a little shorthanded this season, we are, and as well as other FTC teams, are all the more grateful to judges. Right now, we're caring if judges are there or not, and not really about they don't have to be the best judges in the world, because we're just at the point where we need judges no matter what.
Right. I will say that so far, the ones we've been getting, especially in the tournaments that we've had in December, have been really good. One of the things that Emily and I have been working on this year is to try and contact the referees and really make sure they study the materials before the day of the event. so that they don't arrive there and say, oh, we don't have to train them on everything. And our referee volunteers this year have been really good about doing that, we make an emphasis on it and say, please go watch these videos that will show you more about how the game works, and read these specific sections of the manual. If you don't have time to read all of them, just be sure and read this. And so our referees are getting pretty good this year. We're just having to make sure we can fill in enough spots as we're coming into January.
Right. And obviously with this year's robot game, it's necessary to ask, are the referees under more scrutiny, I guess, this year than other years? Because obviously there's not been as many judges. The judges' quality have been decreasing. So have there been more scrutiny against them this year more than others?
So I'd actually like to, because I was so excited when y'all told me y'all were going to ask this question, I'd actually like to touch on this. So I've been in FTC for a long time. And so the anecdote that I'd like to give, I think is a really good one, is in the rescue season, I was acting as the coach for my team, and we were on the field, and Patrick was actually the head ref at the event that we were at. And I don't remember what the call was, but there was some sort of call that it was a penalty that had been missed or a score that had been missed. And when we went to go contest it in the question box with Patrick, he kind of gave us the thing that we as referees give sometimes at competitions, which is, I'm sorry, but no one on the field, like none of the referees noticed that call. Like, unfortunately, that's part of the day. It happens. And so we got excited after he made that call, not because, he had made it. It was that we had gone to one of our parents and realized that they had recorded the match, and us being like kind of a newer team still, we didn't realize that Patrick couldn't review it. So we went back and we were like, here's proof that we scored this. And Patrick, said again, I'm sorry, I can't review this. There's nothing I can do. And so I don't actually think, I know that it's easy to look at this season and say, oh, the referees are under more scrutiny than usual, or we're at a lower quality. And it's just something that sort of happens in the turnover for referees with time. You have people who move away, or when there's a PDP change, you can lose referees and things like that. And so I don't think it's any more or less scrutiny than there's ever been. There's always going to be a detriment, or an appearance of scrutiny on the referees, because we're making calls that, like I said, sometimes you have instances where we don't see everything on the field, even though there's 5 of us, because it might be that 2 of us are looking at the carousel and 2 people are looking at the carousel on the other side of the field, and you're missing something that's going on in the middle of the field because you just don't see it.
Increased scrutiny, from my perspective, it's always been there. It's just, and it's fine, right? We went, I really like the question box interactions that we have, especially if a team comes up and, and they bring the rule book with them and they're able to point to the rule that they're looking at and we can discuss it. Those are the enjoyable ones. Even, and usually what we try to do is to say, here's the way we've been told to interpret the rules, or this is the way it is, and sometimes we just have to say, hey, we missed it, but we're sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. And it's just, it's fine for there to be scrutiny. We want to improve, as we always want to see the teams improve. And so, if people catch things that we missed, then we just kind of have to admit it and move on.
As a referee, what would you say your craziest experience refereeing a match has been?
Okay, I tell this story all the time. I'm sure Patrick and I have certain stories, being longtime friends, that we tell a lot. And so I'm sure he's heard my stories a million times and I've heard his a million times. But in the Skystone season, we had this qualifier at UME Prep. And in finals, it was 7-1, 7-2 against Prince of Peace, which is a local team they're out of a private school of some sort. And Prince of Peace just decided to stop even trying to score and just play defense on technical difficulties, because at the time technical difficulties was stacking 12 to 14 high depending on the match. And so it was just so funny and crazy to watch, because there wasn't anything Prince of Peace was doing that was penalized for, that they would have been penalized for, because they were just following the rules enough. They weren't pinning 7172. They were just trying to be a hindrance. But also 7172's robot weighed so much more than the Prince of Peace robot. So every time Prince of Peace came to like ram into 7172 or be in their way, 7172 just like pushed them out of the way. Like they couldn't do anything. And so it's one of those matches that you really feel like had to be there, but it was so interesting for us to watch as referees, because you don't ever see that much defense. And it was like, I think the penalties were all that the teams were pushing each other to commit penalties by accident, because they were just being that aggressive with each other. And so I think that was one of my craziest matches so far, because as a referee, when the defense starts happening, you really have to watch and pay attention to what's going on.
My crazy one happened this past weekend. And I still don't know what to do about it. I have to contact the chief referee for First Tech Challenge to find out what to do. So at the beginning of the teleop period, we had a robot that went a little crazy, and it pushed the shipping hub, the shared shipping hub, into the warehouse on the other side of the field. So now, can you score in the shared shipping hub without it committing a penalty? Because you're not allowed to score while you're in the warehouse. So I wasn't a referee at that event, right? But I'm the chief referee, so I'm watching. And so all of a sudden the shared shipping hub is all the way in another warehouse. And what do you do with that? Do you tell the teams you can't score it anymore? Do you do what? It's not in the rules anywhere about what to do in that situation. So that was bizarre, and I still don't know exactly what to do with that one. So I'll be contacting the referees to get an official ruling on that and say, if a shipping hub ends up in the warehouse, does that mean it's no longer scoreable without penalties?
Referring back to Emily, what are referees' opinions on playing defense? Because I know there was quite heavy defense last year for Ultimate Goal.
I'm always of the opinion of if you're going to play defense, you must absolutely know every single rule that is written in the game manual part 2. And the reason I say that is because, we have a lot of things, and those of you who are listening to this podcast who are familiar with me as a person know that I am very specific about wording and things like that in the driver's meeting. But it's such a hard thing to accomplish, defense, right? Because especially this year, right? Because you're not your score is not affected by win or loss anymore this year. It's affected purely by points. So by playing defense on the other team, all you're doing is messing with their chance at increasing points, but it's not, helping lift you up any more than it would in past seasons. And so this year I've been a little bit more flexible. I know a couple qualifiers ago, I gave the drivers meeting and was giving hints about how to play defense. But it's one of those things that you just really need to know the rules. And I think a good example of it is that a lot of teams this year are playing defense by just sitting in this gap between the wall and the barrier. Which is legal, but we were seeing some penalties at the Lamar event because those teams weren't just sitting there, they were pushing blocks up, they were using their robot and kind of pushing into the corner and blocking the other team from getting to the blocks or balls or any of that, any of the cargo they weren't able to get to. And so that became a penalty, and the teams weren't really aware of the fact that that was a penalty, because in their mind, we're playing defense, they can get around us, they can go to other shared shipping hub. So I'm always of the opinion of never play defense unless you absolutely know what penalties you're going to incur by playing defense.
And from my perspective, as a general rule, defense is a part of First Tech Challenge games, but it is it's less impressive than offense, because one of the things the game designers want to be really careful of is that a game doesn't get completely shut down by defense, because then it's no fun for anybody. I mean, except for maybe the people who shut it down, but it's not fun for the spectators to watch that nobody's scoring because there's a robot in the way. And nobody likes to see a robot that's, really sophisticated and able to score, and then, its score gets taken away because somebody decides to come swat things out of its arm at the last moment and stuff. And so the game design committee always tries to make rules to make defense possible but not preferred as a way of being able to get ahead. The way to get ahead is by being able to score well and show what you can do, as opposed to what you can prevent others from doing. So my biggest thing about defense is exactly what Emily said. If you're going to take a defensive strategy, one, realize what that does to you in the rankings, and what it will, that it won't really help you in the rankings. And so you're really basically making a statement that you're not too concerned about your own rankings. You're just more interested in stopping somebody else from doing well. And that is kind of a, not a non-first sort of thing. But then secondly, make sure you know all the rules for doing it so that you aren't just incurring penalties and things like that. So 7172 has never like focused on defense as a strategy for ourselves, or to the extent that we do it, it's only if we can do defense while we're still scoring, not just we're doing defense to block somebody else. It's that we're trying to score but do it in a way that maybe slows somebody else down.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and let me just add, as a referee, refereeing defense is really challenging. It's really, really challenging, and especially for new referees, because just like it is for teams, to understand what a block is, what a pin is, what a trap is, and all of the various defensive penalties that are there, it's really, really hard, even for experienced refs, to be able to call those consistently. And so when we have a lot of new referees, it can be a real challenge. And so from a refereeing perspective, a lot of times we sit there and we see a team playing defense, and it that does cause added pressure on the referees to try and make sure they know exactly what each of the penalties is and how to call it.
We talked about what is the craziest experience you've had. It has a little bit more of a negative connotation. Let's switch it up, more positive. What is the most remarkable one you've had where two teams are just really, really good and it's down to the wire?
That happens for me at almost every event. At every event that I don't remember one, especially as you get into the playoffs at the end of the day, or as you get in the later matches in the day, as teams start getting used to things and start figuring out the game and figuring out how to do things together, there's just always great, exciting stories in every event that takes place. So at the D-League qualifier this year, the number one seed was an EduBot. It was a kit bot that they had figured out the strategy, and they ended up being ranked number one at the end of the day. And that was kind of exciting. It's like, wow, for a rookie team to build the classroom robot, the standard design, and then go to the event with their little modifications and score enough to be ranked number one, that's pretty exciting. So the matchups that show up and the rivalries that tend to come out over time when they're good-natured rivalries, I see one of those at almost every event. And so I don't know that I have any that just particularly stand out for me.
I very much agree with Patrick. And for me, it's like, I've had events where in the semifinals, the teams were so evenly matched, we tied in 4 matches. Like, we couldn't even do best 2 out of 3. It was 4 matches that played, and they were so just genuinely excited and goodwill to each other that was amazing. And for me, I think it's always like the best thing that I find in competitions is when teams just so actively show gracious professionalism on the field or in some way or another. Like I've had a match where we gave 22 penalties to Dorkside, and the girls were like crying when we gave them, right? Because that's not what you want in your day. And And then the next match, they were just like on their feet dancing and like trying to make the best of it and remedy the situation. And it's like moments like that you really, I feel like for me, are always such a highlight of my day, is watching y'all go through something that is so like hard. Like I've never given 22 penalties and I hope to never give 22 penalties, but to see you recover and be able to do that, or to see when y'all work together very well, like any of those, and they happen every competition, and it's just amazing. It's always the best part about being a ref.
Yeah, I know that when because I do sports, and I guess I can kind of compare this to that. Whenever I see a team, that's getting blown out or whatever, and then they come back and they're still happy. They're not necessarily happy about getting blown out, but they're able to recover from that. It really warms my heart. It's like, hey, it's okay, and so I can see exactly what you're saying, and I can relate to that a lot.
Yeah.
And I guess the final thing that I wanted to ask today was that if you were an FTC team, what would you do differently in the robot game, or what your game plan is? Would you change that because of the way referees have been so far?
Okay, so just so I understand, you're asking like, what if we could change a rule in the game? What rule would we change? Or
this is more for teams. So like, how should a team change their game plan to better suit?
Oh, to make it easier for refs?
Yes.
Or don't do defense.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, the main thing is, come knowing the rules. I mean, come definitely knowing the rules. The other thing that would help us out as referees is, and I don't see a lot of this going on that I think ought to, is when you get your match schedule for the day, go find all of your partners and figure out what you're going to do before you get to the field. Like go ahead and just go meet with them and say, here, our robot does this, your robot can do that, and come up with a general plan. Because, a lot of teams will show up at the field and it's the first time they've talked to their partner. And it's like, no, you should have figured, unless you're match number 1 or 2, you should have figured this out, long before now, and not be trying to decide it there at the field. So those are the things that I would look for.
Yeah, I think Patrick, I think I agree with Patrick a lot on that. Like the biggest thing is knowing the rules. Like I think, again, for those of you listening to this podcast who know me, I preach that in drivers meetings, especially now that we have human players, because, that's where we see the most penalties this season is people who don't quite teams who don't quite understand the process that they have to go through to deliver a duck, that the duck has to start flush with the sweeper plate, go all the way around, and things like that. We've seen a lot of penalties in that process. And then also teams who don't understand warehouse operations. And so understanding those things and understanding those fundamental parts of the game, right? Like when we as experienced people look at the game, those are the first things we notice, right? Like I know when I saw the game, the first thing I texted Patrick was, oh my God, it's going to be so hard to watch for both duck delivery and warehouse operations. Because, as a referee, you have to make sure that each team's going all the way in and coming all the way out. And the way teams can make that easier is by just working that into their goals and into their plan, right? Like to use 7172 or Iron Rain or Cromdale, like some of the top teams as examples, like those are the first things that they do. Like, they learn the rules inside and out, so that way they can make sure that they're not incurring penalties. And it not just only makes our day easier, it makes your day easier. And I think it's just all around better when the teams know the penalties that they can incur and how to avoid them.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all trying to make it better for the referees. It'll help things get more productive, help things get going, actually get everybody home at an early time. So I think that it's important that we consider these things, and we don't just think, okay, let me score the highest points. Also think about other people. And that, I guess, is what gracious professionalism is. It's this, I guess, thinking about others as well. So
absolutely.
But I think that will wrap up our holiday special for today. I hope everybody's having a great holidays. But before we do wrap this up, I'm going to ask both of you, Patrick and Emily, to stay, if you could give some advice after. But before we do that, we're going to have a final giveaway that is going to be the Go Build a $50 gift card giveaway. So all you have to do is you have to be subscribed to the channel, FTC Feature, like the video, and then you go down into the comment section and let us know what you want to win. And you also put your team name and team number. So we're hoping to pull out these winners sometime in the next week. But yeah, so that will, to the viewers, thank you very much for hanging out on this pretty long episode. If you did stay throughout, that's very cool of you. And I hope you guys have the great rest of your holidays, and wish you nothing but the best. And as well as Patrick and Emily, you guys are the best. So I hope you guys have a great holidays. And let's just leave this on a final, I guess, piece of advice. And if we want, we can have this. Patrick, you shared with us last podcast, so we can have Emily share this time. If you had one thing you had to say to FTC teams that's like a piece of advice that should always go by, what would it be?
I think if you can just understand and embody gracious professionalism, like one of my favorite questions to ask teams and to ask people, especially because I do Dean's List reviewing, is what does gracious professionalism mean to you? And it means something different to everyone, right? Because it's a really flexible term. And I think if you can just work to embody that, right? Like you said, thinking of other people and not just how your team can succeed. That's one of the best ways to succeed in FTC. I mean, the teams that have been long-term teams in the region, teams like 7172 and Iron Rain and Technobots, like they're so good at embodying that gracious professionalism and carrying it as a legacy through their teams. And that's what's made them established and made them long-running teams, is by just always thinking about the people who come next and the other teams that are out there. And I just think that's the best thing you could do, is if you can just really understand what gracious professionalism means, whether it's to you or to someone else, I think that you're going to succeed in first all the way through.
Before we end this episode, let's take some time to thank those who have made FTC possible this past year, and especially from last year as well, especially with the ongoing pandemic.
So I'd be going out to everybody in the management, the PDP Lon Cherryholmes, the head of First in Texas, the referees who are spending their own time, the judges, and of course, finally, the teams who are participating in this, the coaches of these teams, because they have to dedicate literally countless hours of their time, and of course, the parents who are able to provide these students for the opportunity to compete at these. So to everybody that's getting involved in this, we want to say a huge thank you. None of this would be possible without everybody else. So we're all just working together as a community, and let's hope to have a productive January full of qualifiers.
And league tournaments.
Yes. So bye, Patrick, bye, Emily, and bye, viewers. We will see you guys on the next episode, and hope you guys have a great holidays. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.